Hello and welcome to the Catholic Intellectual. I'm your host, Alexander Chenda. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Today I want to talk about freedom. In particular, some things that I've been thinking about for a while about what the nature of freedom is, especially from an experiential standpoint. So, what is it that we experience and feel as freedom? And to me, I believe that the feeling of freedom comes from having obstacles removed from the things that we desire. And this can kind of come in two ways. So one, we can greatly and earnestly desire something, and that we have certain things that restrain us from achieving the specific thing that we desire, and so we feel a sense of unfreedom or lack of freedom. And consequently, when those obstacles are removed, we feel a sense of freedom. So this would be, for example, the desire to worship, and having that restrained maybe by a totalitarian government, maybe thinking about like the Polish under communist rule, that there was a sense that there was an oppression that was happening, there was a lack of freedom, and that they wanted this very specific thing and the ability to worship the Lord. Now, there's also a different sense of freedom. So it's sort of like a general sense of removing restrictions from all possible opportunities that someone might want. So I think that each one of us, we have the sense that we desire a number of possible things, even if we're not going to actively pursue them all. So, for example, I desire to be a millionaire. Now, I'm not going to actively pursue that because I think that there are other things that are more valuable for me to do with my life than to spend my life in pursuit of money. But there is still this sense that I desire that, and I like the idea of not having that opportunity cut off from me. That conceivably I could become a millionaire if I so chose to aim my life a certain way, and I did certain things, and I was fortunate enough to have certain things happen to me. Now, these two kind of frameworks or experiences of freedom, I think, relate to what St. John Paul II would refer to as freedom for and freedom from. In one case, we're focused on some specific thing that we want to achieve, and so we experience freedom as the removal of obstacles towards that. And in the other case, there's no specific thing that we're really aiming at. We just have this general sense of wanting to remove restrictions from all the possible courses that we could choose in life. And there is something to both types of freedom. So to kind of give the due to the second sort of freedom from, there is a sense in which each one of us is unique as an individual. We have our unique desires and tastes and preferences. For example, not all of us want to become doctors or priests or financiers. We all have kind of different draws in terms of what we want to do with our lives. And so it seems to be a good thing that we would have the freedom to be able to choose a career that matches what we desire according to our personal preference. And even something to discernment and following God's will in that God expresses what He wants for our lives in terms of the desires that He gives us, in terms of the gifts and talents that He gives us. So it's good that we have this kind of freedom. But in another sense, it can be problematic when in trying to open up the freedom of all opportunities, we don't actually aim at anything. And so we never actually have anything or achieve anything. It's a kind of wanting to have our cake and eat it too situation where we end up really ultimately having nothing because we want to have anything. So let's return to the career example. The moment that you choose to go down a career, and this is just kind of a general point about how life works in general, the moment that you choose to commit yourself to anything, to pursue something, you also cut off other opportunities in your life. You cut off the other potential things that you could choose to do with that time. So, for example, I was talking about becoming a millionaire and how in some sense, I do desire that, but I think other things are better to do with my life. And for me, that I believe is to pursue a call to the priesthood at this moment. That's what God is calling me in. That is what God is calling me towards at this moment in my life. And that is what I perceive is going to bring me the greatest happiness and joy, because it is what, in my discernment, I have found that God is calling me to do, and that we all find our greatest happiness and joy in doing the will of God in our lives. But that means cutting off all the other things that I could do in my life. That means devoting a great number of years to study. And as I said earlier, cutting out the opportunity to all these other good things in life that I might have, including, wealth, a family. So to become proficient, to achieve certain goods, we have to restrict ourselves from other goods. And so from a certain perspective, that actually seems like we have to choose a lack of freedom. And this is where the freedom for thing comes in, because we don't just want a general sense of freedom. We don't just want to lose all restrictions. We want freedom for the sake of something else. Freedom is not a final good. So in philosophy, final goods are the things that are done for their own sake and not for the sake of anything else. So to give an example of this is love, friendship. We pursue goodness for goodness sake. Freedom seems like this in a certain sense because we all appreciate the feeling of freedom. But freedom can't be understood out of relationship to the good. That freedom only is true freedom when it's in relationship to the good. And in reality, if we stick with an idea of freedom from, we actually lose that sense of freedom. So each one of us has a multitude of different desires. And each one of us, by nature of being human, desires God as our ultimate good, as the highest thing. But because of the fall and because of the nature of the way life works, pursuing God as our ultimate good always requires sacrificing other goods. And this is the nature of the cross and resurrection, that we have to choose to love God. We have to choose to sacrifice certain things in order to pursue God. And this means that we can't just give in to whatever whims come along in our passions. We have to learn to discipline our passions. And so we have to accept a certain kind of restriction, or you might even say like, in a certain extent, it seems like a sort of slavery almost, in terms of chaining our passions in order to train them. And this I think is some of like the deep mystery of the cross and resurrection. What it means in the Gospels when Jesus says that he who would lose his life for my sake will gain it, and he who seeks to preserve his life will lose it. That if you seek to preserve your life, to just follow every whim that moves in your passions, you're ultimately going to become chained to those passions. They're going to enslave you. And you're going to lose the ability to pursue that ultimate good that you desire in your life, which is God, which each one of us has. So they will become chains and shackles for you. Whereas if you choose to die in the moment, to discipline your passions, it will feel like death and a certain kind of slavery in that moment. But what happens over time is that when we discipline our passions, we reorder ourselves towards who we were meant to be in a sort of pre-fallen state. That we reorder ourselves in the direction of our ultimate good, which is God. And so we actually gain this freedom as all our drives and passions become more directed towards our ultimate good, more directed towards the ultimate desire of our hearts, which is God. And so we actually gain a sense of freedom that comes from that. We gain a life that comes through that death. And again, this is the importance of this idea of freedom from versus freedom for. We want to be free to pursue God. We want to be free to pursue our ultimate good. The things that are best in life. That always requires sacrifice. It always requires sacrificing something. And so in certain immediate moments, it's going to actually look like a lack of freedom. But it will actually bring about true and greater freedom, versus a freedom from, which will look like in a moment like it is freedom, and in a certain sense it really is a kind of freedom, can ultimately produce a slavery as we chain ourselves to our lower drives and lower passions that end up restricting us from pursuing our ultimate good. Well, I hope you found some of these reflections helpful and provocative. I look forward to reading your comments, and I hope to be back soon with another video like this with some of my thoughts on certain things that I've been reflecting on. Thank you. Have a good day, and I'll be praying for you. Please pray for me.